Hello and welcome to the Online School of Theology. I'm Pastor Mike. This video is meant for use with our course on Old Testament history, but is provided free online for anyone who wishes to view it and hopefully learn a thing or two about the Bible. If you are interested in learning more about the Bible, I invite you to check out our courses online at onlineschooloftheology.com. These courses are designed and priced for people who just want to learn more about the Bible and don't need or want an actual degree. This video is a lesson on Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel is one of the more tragic stories of the Bible because Abel's death seems so completely needless. The story is more than just about an intense sibling rivalry, however. To view it as just a matter of jealousy or the story of the first murder in the Bible is really missing the point. The story of Cain and Abel is found in Genesis 4, immediately following the fall of man. One way of looking at this story is to see how quickly sin grows and escalates. Yeast is used as a metaphor in the Bible for sin, because of the way that it grows and permeates so quickly. And this is definitely what Genesis 4 shows. There have been a small number of years between the fall of man in Genesis 3 and Genesis 4. Time has to pass for Cain and Abel to grow into men. We don't know their exact age. But as we read the story of Genesis, we go directly from a fairly innocent sin in Genesis 3 of eating a forbidden fruit to Genesis 4 being murder. The real story of Cain and Abel is a matter of worship, however. And it's a very important matter that I believe the church doesn't always get. Take a look at verses 2 to 4 of Genesis 4. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. If this were the first time you were reading this passage, you might not think that there's anything wrong here. Cain and Abel both brought an offering to the Lord in accordance with their occupation. But there are two things wrong with Cain's sacrifice. We're not told in Genesis 4 why Cain's sacrifice is wrong, but we know elsewhere in the Bible that sacrifices involve the shedding of blood. Now this may seem quite barbaric to our modern sensibilities, but all of the blood sacrifices pointed to the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. So there's a good reason why sacrifices involve blood. It's reasonable to believe that Cain and Abel both knew that an acceptable sacrifice was a blood sacrifice, because this is the first sacrifice that was established in Genesis 3 after the fall of man. God has to provide the skin of an animal in order to cover Adam and Eve's nakedness. Adam and Eve's fig leaves did not cover their spiritual nakedness, even though it might have covered their physical nakedness. Cain and Abel would have known this story, and it's likely that they have already received the instruction that all sacrifices involve the shedding of blood. So this being the case, Cain's sacrifice is not an acceptable one to God. We often like to tell God how we're going to worship rather than listen to how He demands to be worshiped. It's not an audible thing, but in our actions and attitudes, we tell God that we're not getting up too early to worship because Sunday is our only day off. Or maybe we declare that we can only give a certain amount of money because money's tight and bills are due, and well, God will understand. Or maybe we tell God that we're not going to attend a certain church because they sing boring hymns, or we're not going to attend a radical church that people raise their hands in. We often tell God how we will and won't worship him, rather than seeking out how he desires to be worshiped. Well, there's another thing that makes Cain's sacrifice unacceptable, however. It's subtle, but the text tells us that Cain gave some of the fruits of the soil. Later on, God established a sacrifice known as first fruits, but that is not the case here. This isn't the first of Cain's harvest. It's not said or even implied that this is the best of his harvest. It's probably just the leftovers. It's probably whatever would have gone to waste anyway. It's just some fruit. Now compare that sacrifice to Abel's. Abel did bring the firstborn of his flock, and it's the best portions, the fat portions. It isn't a sickly animal that he had no use for. Instead, it's the best that he had. Attitude matters as much as what we give. Paul tells us to be cheerful givers. I personally believe in giving a 10% tithe, and I believe that God blesses those who do so. But people should not give simply because they believe the Bible instructs them to do so. They should give because they want to do so. If you give 10% to church because you feel obligated to do so, you aren't going to be blessed as if you gave freely. So God confronts Cain about his sacrifice. Picking up in the middle of verse 4, it says, "The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.'" It's implied here that Cain has done wrong with his sacrifice. His sacrifice is not acceptable, and he knew it. It is, as I already said, I think that Cain knew the physical sacrifice had to involve blood. And what he's given is not what God wanted. But there's also an attitude of thanksgiving, or rather the lack of, with Cain. It's a begrudging sacrifice that is given out of a sense of duty. Well, this story ends rather unhappily. We know Cain kills his brother Abel. There's probably jealousy involved, and there's undoubtedly anger as well. Cain has no reason to be angry with his brother just because Abel gave a proper sacrifice. Abel did nothing wrong. God didn't play favorites with Abel, so there's no reason to be jealous. If Cain had done as he should have, he would have been accepted by God as well. But he didn't, and he is cursed and given a mark so that no one kills him. There's a couple of questions that crop up commonly with the story of Cain and Abel, and I'm going to briefly address them. The first involves the mark that Cain is given. We have no idea what this mark is. Some people have speculated and have stated that Cain is given dark skin. He is made black, we might say. And therefore, dark-skinned people are descendants of Cain. There's absolutely no reason to conclude that based on this passage. In some way, it might explain the hardships that dark-skinned people have endured, particularly people in Africa, but we know dark-skinned people have endured hardship even to this day, racism and things of that nature. But to say that the hardships they have endured is because they are descendants of Cain would be in some way to excuse the atrocities that they have suffered at the hands of other people. And so I think that that is just absolutely foolish. That would imply that they somehow deserved it being descendants of Cain. So I think that saying the mark of Cain is to be made with dark skin is a very dangerous assumption. We just should not make that assumption. We should not go there. The other question that people like to ask is, where did Cain get his wife? Well, of course, this question is valid for all of the early generations that descended from Adam and Eve. We are only told of 3 children that Adam and Eve had, but undoubtedly they had many more. Given their supernaturally long lifespans, God may very well have extended Eve's childbearing years as well. And it's at least possible that she has hundreds of children. That's purely speculation on my part. We are not given a number. But even if she starts having children at a very early age, she could have 30, even 40 children. Mathematically, there could be a very sizable population in a short number of years. The real issue, though, is not how many children can Adam and Eve have. It's a matter of genetics, though. It is immoral, illegal, and disgusting to have sex with a relative today. But in Cain's day, it was a different culture, and we will see this even later on in Genesis. More importantly, though, there is a reason why relatives can't have children today. Our genetics are too similar, and birth defects are likely. Adam and Eve, though, would carry all of the genetics for the entire human race. So their children would be very different genetically. One child may be born with blonde hair and blue eyes, while another child may have a dark complexion with dark hair, and a third child may have a fair complexion with red hair and green eyes. Adam and Eve's children would be very genetically diverse, unlike our children today. So the thought of having or marrying a sister or cousin makes us cringe today, and rightfully so. But in Adam and Eve's day, it wasn't immoral, and it wouldn't have had the harm that it would have today. So the answer is Cain does marry a relative. We aren't given hardly any of the children of Adam and Eve. We don't know their names. But Cain would have married a relative, whether it is a direct sister or some niece, grandniece. We don't know. It would have been a relative, but it wouldn't have had the harm that it would have had today. So that's the brief answer to that question. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.